Hello, and welcome to Enhancing Visibility for Cloud Security Operations. If you're joining us live, our speaker will be answering questions in the post-session discussion forum immediately following the presentation. The forum link is available in the networking lounge. For audio-video issues, you can click the technical support button below. I'd now like to turn you over to Roger O'Farrell for the presentation.
All right, Casey, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So, yeah, welcome everybody. My name is Roger O'Farrell, and I'm gonna be talking to you today about how we're going to be enhancing visibility in cloud security operations. Definitely something that hopefully is going to be of value to you. Before we start talking about that, we have to consider how we got here. You know, how we've been getting to the cloud. Part of that has been with digital transformation. I'm sure you've heard those words out there a lot. It's everywhere. So it's the race to reinvent the way that business do things. Part of that is technology infrastructures, and the cloud has been playing a big role in that digital transformation. So as a result of that, we are being asked by our companies to move quick and fast and with agility, and part of that translates to the cloud. We need to stand infrastructure, we need to deploy applications and all of what that entails quickly on the cloud. And as part of that, we're going to see throughout this presentation that there's a lot of challenges for us in security. And hopefully we're going to answer today the question of, how are we going to gain back that visibility that we're losing to some extent as we move to the cloud, maybe again, because we're doing it at the speed of light or something like that. But you should leave today with some ideas of how you're going to be attacking that problem. So in that journey to the cloud, either you're starting, you might be in the middle of it, or maybe you're done with it. It could be one of two things. It could be something like the right side of the picture here. It could be all green grass and blue skies because you did your planning, you understood what you were walking into, and that's ideally that's what would happen. But again, due to that speed to market that we need to achieve and do things quick, maybe it looks something like the picture on the left. It could be gloomy and you can have some issues and things that need to be fixed and addressed. But regardless of where you stand in there, it's a good idea to understand what are the security implications, what are the challenges, what is going out there with security on the cloud and visibility and all the topics that we're going to be talking about today. To understand that and put it into perspective, I like to reference the ISC Squared Cloud Security Report. It's fairly fresh. One of the first questions that they ask is to the people who responded, how concerned are you about the security of public cloud? And look at that number, 94% said, I'm somewhere between moderately concerned to really concerned. So that tells you a story about security in the cloud. It's in everybody's mind. I'm pretty sure some people are losing sleep because of that, but it's a challenge and there's a concern and we need to address it and again, plan for it and execute. The other question that they ask, what is it that you're concerned about? So the two big buckets, data loss or leakage and privacy and confidentiality issues. No surprise for anybody, hopefully. These are the breaches that we're seeing out there a lot. We're seeing buckets exposed, PII, confidential information that it keeps getting exposed. And that is definitely reflected here. Also in that survey, they ask, so what's going on? What are the exact issues that you're having? Look at the biggest one, the lack of qualified staff. We're going to talk more about that today. And we're also going to talk about the one below that at 33%, the visibility issue, which is what we're here for. Those are going to be highly related. We're going to see, they're going to be part of the equation that we're going to use to solve this visibility problem. The other big issue that we have, and we're also going to talk in a lot of detail today, is going to be tools, because we need to solve this in part with tools. So we're going to go ahead and see how that plays out. The problem that we have here, we have 82% of the people who responded to that survey saying, I am somewhat confident in my tools in the cloud, all the way to, they're just not working. So we're going to see how we can resolve that problem of tooling in the cloud. Hopefully, you leave here with the answers to those questions. But before we do that, we have to understand what are those challenges that we're talking about here in regards to visibility on the cloud. And to understand that, I like to put it to the light of the different cloud models. When we start talking about on-premise, typical IT infrastructure, we have either our own data center, co-location facility, or something like that. It's been easy for us. We got it. We understand how that works. It's a stack of servers, and we have our networking gear, our hardware, and all of that. And we have a lot of visibility. We can insert, network sensors and things like that are going to let us know what is happening. They're going to give us all that information so we can paint that visibility picture in a, fairly good way. When we start talking about private cloud, we sort of got it because it's kind of, we leveraging on-prem type technologies, and we're bringing some cloud elements in. So we sort of got it, okay? When we talk about the public cloud, now this is where a little bit of fear comes in. Some people don't fully understand it. We're going to talk more about that. It's hard managing one provider from a security perspective and putting controls and gaining that visibility. But when you talk about multi-cloud, now you're doubling the issue or tripling that issue because you have other providers. And if there's one thing that we know is that two providers don't do the same thing in the same way. So now you have to understand how each one of those is going to address certain things. So definitely the problem keeps getting a little bit more complicated as we go through all those models. Now, the challenges that we have out there, everything is changing super, super fast. Things happen in the blink of an eye in the cloud, and we have to account for all of those things. For example, if you are doing automatic scaling operations to bring up more resources in your peak times for, you have a product launch or something went viral online and everybody's hitting your resources, those assets that are going to come up, additional computing power or whatever it is, databases, you name it, they are going to be living there potentially for short, tiny period of time. So you have to account for that from a visibility perspective. Also, the data now moves in completely different ways. Before we had the old monolithic application. Now we have a whole bunch of tiny microservices that are going to be sending your data back and forth. There's going to be some added complexity, kind of what you see here in the diagram. There's a lot of components and different places where your data will move, and you have to make sure that you are protecting data and understanding, getting that visibility, what's happening at each step, because it's something it's, there's an issue somewhere, you must understand what's going on. The other big problem that we have, expertise gaps. In a lot of cases, you saw the survey results, there's a big gap between what's needed to design, operate, and maintain all of these solutions and what your people know. So we have to make sure that we address that. As a result of all of this, what's happening is that for some of you out there, you may not have an idea what's going on in your cloud platforms. That could be a problem if we don't understand that. We're not going to be able to track events and see what's going on out there. We will not have an understanding of the issues that are going to come, security problems and things like that. Even worse, we will not be able to identify potential threats. And at the end of the day, what we do as security professionals is dealing with risk, and we're not going to be able to identify and communicate risk appropriately. So that's a serious problem, and we need to take some action to make sure that we communicate that risk. The question then becomes, okay, so what are we going to do now? How do we proceed? How do we gain that visibility? That is what we need to understand. And it's a multi-part equation. We're going to attack it from a lot of different angles. But here's kind of the proposal that I have for you. We have to understand what cloud assets we have out there. This is nothing new. We've been talking about managing your assets forever in security, in IT, all of that. You have to know what you have if you want to protect it. We also have to understand what are some of the attacks that are specific to cloud out there, because now the threat landscape is going to be a little bit different than when we're talking on premise and things like that. Sure, some things will translate, but some of them are going to be very particular. Also, we have to design that visibility strategy. We have to understand that we cannot just turn things on and expect all our problems to be solved. We should have a plan. We'll talk more about that. We also talk about tooling. We'll see a lot of several tools here, cloud native, and we'll talk about third-party tools and things like that, how everything fits into that equation. Also, we got to make sure that we're leveraging automation. And last but not least, skills development. I'm a big believer in people, process, and technology. We cannot leave the people out of this. So we have to make sure that we address that also. From going more in depth into each of these, cloud assets, if you follow the Center for Internet Security, their critical security controls, they always say top controls are hardware inventory and software inventory. Now, I'm using hardware loosely here in the cloud because, of course, there's nothing for us to touch. But think about hardware in the cloud as your computing assets, EC2 machines if you're talking AWS, VMs if you're talking Azure, if you're talking about things like serverless, your functions, all of that now becomes computing power. So it's kind of the equivalent of an asset. So you have to understand what that is, what you have, because again, you cannot protect the things that you have. You don't know that, your risk is going to go through the roof. So that's going to be number one. We also have to use configuration management tools. Knowing the assets that we have, that's okay, but we must always ensure that they are configured in whatever desired state we have determined. Same thing that applies on-prem, we're going to have that on the cloud too. So we have to make sure that nothing is being tampered, that there's no unauthorized changes, or if there's an attempt or something like that, we should be able to detect that, and we'll see how we're going to do that coming up in a little bit. Attacks, we have to understand what is it that the bad guys are doing out there? How are they trying to compromise us? The adversary tactics, like I said, are going to be a little bit different in the cloud. You have to understand specific things like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. They added cloud components late last year, so go ahead and look into that. That's going to give you some very specific ideas of actual compromises and how attackers have penetrated cloud systems. The Cloud Security Alliance, they also putting a lot of guidance out there with the top cloud threats and all of that, so you can understand exactly what is it that we're talking about. After you understand all of that, now we can start talking about how we're going to plan for security use cases. Now we can do a little bit of threat modeling and things like that. Understand what are the specific issues that we should be considering when we're talking about security in the cloud. From there, we can move on later on to more advanced things like threat hunting. We can automate some things. If we know something is not happening or we should not be allowing it, well, those things should be remediated as close as real time as you can. Remember that in the cloud, we cannot be doing things manually. It just doesn't scale. Again, it's going to move just way too fast. We have to identify what we don't want, and we have to automate how we're going to handle those things. And of course, like everything, you have to continuously test and refine all of this stuff, because otherwise it's just going to become stale. From there, we have to talk about the strategy. Remember, don't walk into this without a plan. If you're in the early stages, sit down and think about this. So the question becomes, what are we going to be looking at? Well, think about all those assets that I just mentioned. Network components, databases, virtual machines, serverless components, containers. And here's why this is important. If we're talking about monitoring your VMs, that's fairly easy. You can do that easy in the cloud. It's really no different, a VM in the cloud, that it's on-prem. Otherwise, other than the fact that you don't control the hypervisor, but that's about it. But when we talk about some more advanced things like serverless and containers, now this is a little bit different. You may going to have to leverage some third-party tooling. And again, we'll talk more about that. But this is going to help answer the questions, what do we look at? After you know what you have and what you need to consider from here, again, this is just a starting point, then you can start answering some questions of, okay, what are we going to do here with this? What are we going to do with that? But always make sure that you understand what you have and what are the things that you have to put your eyes on. After that, then you can start to talk about one of the key things that we need to do, centralized logging, because all of those things that we talked about in the previous slide generate logs, network activity, serverless functions, VMs, you name it, everything has a log, but it's fairly trivial dumping those to some sort of central storage like a bucket, but that doesn't really mean it's going to be actionable for you. That is where the tooling is going to go ahead and come and play an important role. You should be doing something like centralizing, correlating, analyzing all those logs. Here we just have an example of, Splunk, super widely used. But you may have Elk or some third-party product, cloud native SIEM, something like that. Whatever your solution is, it's going to make your life easier when you have all that data centralized and you don't have to be hunting for logs and looking for things everywhere. So lots of value right there. Now, when we talk about the tools, always start, of course, looking first at what the cloud service provider is giving you. And this is why this is important, because first, those tools, you just click a button and you turn them on. They're going to be super easy to leverage. And the other thing that we'll see out there is that they interact with the other native services fairly smooth. So it's very easy to turn something on and, it's going to talk to your systems. Also, we just mentioned centralizing, correlating, and visualizing. The providers may have some tools in that space, sure, but understand that there are going to be some limitations. If you come from a super mature on-premise security environment, you're going to see now that the patterns here are going to be a little bit different. The cloud native tooling might not be enough for you. And this is a question that you're going to have to answer, but, always consider what they have. For some example, here we have CloudWatch, GuardDuty, Security Hub. We'll talk about those more in detail. Azure has Sentinel and some other tools, and Google, GCP, they also have their security command center. So everybody's doing something in security. Part of the message here is consider what each provider is giving you. It's not going to be the same offerings across providers. Some of them are going to be more mature in the security space. Other ones may not. Solutions may vary. Your mileage may vary. So make sure that at least you're understanding what the service provider is giving you, and then from there you can go ahead and evaluate what's going to be your next need. To take a look in a little bit more detail into some of the cloud provider specific tools, I wanted to give you an idea here with a practical example of what sort of visibility we gain with a tool like CloudWatch. So like I mentioned, if you live in the AWS world, you know that you can throw your logs into a bucket and they're going to live there, and that's fine. But again, the other part of that question is, what do we do with those? How do we action them? So tools like CloudWatch are going to help answer that question. They're going to let us see what's happening. For example, if you know here in this example that the key creation is something that is rare and it should only be limited to some people in your environment, well, you can go ahead and create some filters to look for that activity. As you can see in this example, we're saying, show me, create access key events. From there, you can go ahead and take a look in depth at some of that activity. Here I've highlighted a few fields of interest, and the first one says, somebody created a key. We see the event name right there. The username is evil person. And I know I'm making it a little bit obvious, but hopefully you get the idea to illustrate what you should be looking at. So now you start seeing how you can make those logs actionable, and you see the keys that the person created, and you start to paint a better picture of what's going on. From there, then you can go ahead and say, okay, show me all the activity that this evil person user has been performing. So that's what we're doing here. We're changing our filter and selecting some fields. And here, now we have basically a trail of what this person did. The person logged in through the console. They changed a password, created a security group, created a bucket, authorized security group ingress. So if this speaks to you, you understand that this seems awful, weird. Definitely somebody here is up to no good. So now we see how from having all the logs in one place, now we just get the picture a little bit better. So again, we're gaining on that visibility. We're understanding what's happening here. So lots of value right there. Another tool that we can leverage in the Amazon world, it's going to be Security Hub. And this tool is going to give you a security score. So it's going to go ahead and compare how your environment is set up against a set of best practices. Here we're using the CIS benchmark, and we're also using the AWS foundational practices, security best practices. So when you dig into that, what you can see is that you see what needs action. What is going on here that I need to pay attention to? Here it's saying that we have something critical. It's saying, listen, your root account does not have multi-factor enabled. So that's bad, first of all. Hopefully that's not you. That's you. Go fix it. But the issue here is that we're seeing that we have a critical issue that if we did not enable tools like this, we would be basically blind to the fact that this was going on. This would have been exposed to whoever set up the account, but if that person forgot that, now the tool here is going to give us that visibility to understand that somebody did something wrong or forgot something, and we need to go ahead and fix it. So what we're seeing here is that we have different tools that are adding a little bit of value. And again, we're getting that equation of how we're going to gain visibility. Every tool is going to do a little bit to help us go towards that state where we have the visibility that we are expecting. Another one of those tools that's going to be very helpful for us is going to be GuardDuty. GuardDuty, it's kind of a machine learning application, service. If you're new to it, what it does, it's going to collect in the background a lot of your logs, network activity, DNS, and other logs, and it's not really exposing the logs to you. What it's doing is detecting suspicious things. Over time, this tool can learn like your use patterns and things like that, and if there's some sort of anomaly, it can go ahead and alert you. Example that we have marked here at the top, somebody's trying to brute force via SSH, one of your EC2 machines that is exposed out to the internet. And that might be of concern to you, so you may want to do something about that. If we keep going down that list, we're going to see other things that look suspicious, like port scans, more brute force attacks. And if we look all the way at the bottom, we even have more details on root credential usage. Remember that part of what we need to do here in security, we have to protect, the crown jewels. For us, the root account in AWS or whatever your provider is, that master account, it's going to be one of those crown jewels. You want to make sure that that's not used on an everyday basis. If you have it, fairly secured and you see activity with that root account, there's something weird there. So now, again, more visibility, things that are strange, and these are happening for a reason. From here, you can go ahead and you see the option suppress the finding if that's an activity that you deem sure, okay, we can live with this. But at least this is going to give your analysts and responders an idea of what to look at and what kind of activity is going on. Another great tool of value. From there, we also move to another one called AWS Config. And this goes back to what I mentioned. You have to manage your inventory. You have to make sure that that desired state is enforced at all times and that you get alerts on any deviations, okay? If we don't have this set of tools, we may not see that. What we have here is telling us that we have a number of resources that are not compliant with the rules that we set. And we're talking about rules like buckets should not be exposed publicly. A bucket should be accessed over SSL, things like that. There's a, a whole bunch of default rules. You can set your custom rules. So that's going to be part of that continuous monitoring aspect. This tool is always going to be running, looking at things that may look a little bit weird based on the rules that you have set. And you've said, my system should be in this state. And yeah, it's going to let you know when something deviates from that. Quick example here to bring it back to our example of the evil person that we talked about a minute ago. What we see here in config is that we have a security group that was created on the 27th of October, and you see what is happening with that. It's letting you know that 2 configuration events happened on that day. It was created first, and then it was modified to allow some network traffic in. So now you see the value of tools like this. You can go back and look at a timeline and see what changes happened, when, and who did it. So a lot of value. If you want to know more about the event, you can click on that CloudTrail option, and it's going to show you the full log. But at least this is more actionable than, going through a very verbose log and sifting through it and figure out what happened. This is kind of the things that first responders, incident responders may need to go ahead and at least get a quick idea of what's happening. Of course, you can go and follow the breadcrumbs later on, but this is going to give you that high-level idea of what is the bad activity. Also, we have AWS Macie. It's kind of a data loss prevention equivalent. This tool was recently revamped, so it has a little bit more functionality. Here what we see is that you can see at a glance, do I have anything publicly exposed? Do I have stuff unencrypted? Am I sharing some stuff? And those are things, if you do not have publicly accessible buckets and you see something here, that's something that's concerning and you should be looking at. So it's going to be a good tool to make, if you have a lot of documents that you need to analyze, this is going to be helpful for that. Taking a little bit of another look into this, here we see that on the lower section, we have custom data identifiers. So what we're saying here is we can define what we're looking for in those documents. For example, if you classify your data and you have public, sensitive, confidential or secret or something like that, you can go ahead and set rules that look for that information. So let's say you have a public bucket where you put your press releases and things like that. Well, you should be looking for confidential things in there because they do not belong in that bucket. That would be kind of an example of what we're seeing here. Here we're seeing that there was a hit of the word confidential on that file that is highlighted there. And this is the bucket that you would not expect confidential information. So that would allow you, again, to gain that visibility into things that could be going on that maybe you would never know in some other way. So hopefully you see, again, how each one of those tools is kind of helping paint a big picture of visibility and how we can understand what's happening in our cloud environment. But with that, we have to be mindful of the gap here. Those cloud service provider native tools, they're not going to be unicorns. They're not this magical thing that will resolve all of your visibility problems and everything is good. No, we established that early on. We said you may need third-party tools. Some of these tools are going to be expensive. Then you have to make the exercise. Is it worth bringing a third-party tool if it's going to cost me the same and I get more functionality? It's a question that you have to ask. You have to go through that exercise. You have to understand what every tool is providing you and what gaps they're going to leave. And based on your risk appetite, you can say, sure, I can live with this. Oh, no, I need I need something else that's going to work better for me. And that's when you're going to have to move to third parties. So what I'm saying here is that the third parties will bring a lot of value, just the same way that the CSP tools will. For third parties, the good thing in some instances is that you know them already. So you might be able to, if your licensing has some mobility clause or something like that, you might be able, if you're migrating from on-prem to cloud, you might be able to bring those licenses with you. That might not be an additional cost. That's something that's going to be a factor to consider. Also, we talked about the challenge of visibility for serverless operations and containers, Kubernetes, Docker containers, you name it, all that stuff. Some of these providers here, they're going to have very specialized tools that are going to allow you to gain way deeper visibility than anything that any native provider can have. So if you move in those spaces, it's something for sure that you're going to have to look at. They are going to help you, all these tools, to cover those gaps that the providers might be, leaving out. So again, it's an exercise for all of us to kind of do the math, I like to call it, and evaluate and see, what we have and what are we going to need after we apply the basic controls that we can. From there, we move on to talk about automation. We have to do this again. It doesn't scale to do things manually on the cloud. You're going to have to think about things like cloud security posture management tools, more of those tools that are looking at a high level at your environment and saying, okay, this is everything that we are supposed to be doing, we're doing based on whatever you said. So those tools are going to give you a lot of value, especially as your cloud environments grow. You kind of get the single pane of glass view. That's going to be of value for sure. Also, with automation, you're continuously assessing your cloud. You don't have to kick anything off. It will be doing that all the time. Remediation also, you could do that automatically. That's the other thing. If you know buckets should not be publicly exposed, and somebody does that, you can revert that action via automation. Also, these tools are going to give you visibility into multiple environments. If you're one of those that lives in multi-cloud, this is going to make a lot of sense, because doing in-house a lot of mapping of how one provider does one thing and how the other provider does it, that is really hard. So tools that move in multi-cloud environments will bring you a lot of value. Also, we're going to be able to detect misconfiguration. Remember that we said that most of the breaches that we're seeing is because somebody clicked on something and made a mistake, made that bucket public, left some administrative interface exposed in some tools or something like that. And at the end of the day, with all of this stuff, we're going to be able to identify and remediate all the risk that activity is going to bring to us. So definitely consider, how much you're automating, and always be asking yourself how we can get better by doing automation. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean automate all the things, because at some point, some things will need human interaction. But like I said, those low-hanging fruit, the things that you absolutely know that should not be happening, you should be auto-remediating all of that stuff. Skills, to wrap it up here, skills are important. We have to train our people. I always try to, like I said, frame everything from process, people, and technology. So I always sneak in the skills slide every time I talk, because I talk to people out there, and it's not happening to the extent that I wish. When I talk to my peers in the field, they say, no, I'm just learning things by myself, or I get no training or something like that. We have to make sure that we're training our people. We have to make sure that we're going hands-on, because all of these tools in the theory, they look fancy. You read the documentation and you may think you got it, but we have to test it. We have to make sure we understand how the tools are going to interact with things, how they're going to alert us. Are we going to get like thousands of false positives? We have to do that. Also, from the skills perspective, throw some challenges to yourself. If you're an engineer or if you're a leader, throw it out to your people. It's like, hey, how would you do this in the cloud? Or what if X or Y or Z happen in the cloud? How would we respond to that? So you can do something like game days, tabletop exercises, but more hands-on. And you can do that in the cloud. That's going to be helpful. It's going to bring a lot of value. So a couple of ideas, to get you going. Never forget about, closing that skills gap that everybody in cybersecurity talks about. So to conclude and bring it back home, kind of recapping what we talked about today, no secret. It's going to be challenging gaining a level of visibility for security operations that we are going to be comfortable with. So it's going to take some time. It's going to take some effort. Planning a strategy is going to be a key thing for that. Remember that we can have logs, but we have to make them actionable. We have to centralize, visualize, correlate, and that's going to require some tooling. CSP tools are going to help us. They may leave some gaps, may or may not, depends on your use case. We may need to bring third-party tools, and that's going to go ahead and, help us what we're trying to do, reduce risk. Finally, please do not forget to train your people, because the cloud is something fantastic, exciting. Again, it's enabling businesses to move at a really fast speed, very efficient. But only when we do all the things that we saw here today, that's when we are going to answer that question. How can we reduce risk by gaining visibility in the cloud? So with that, I want to thank everybody. Continue the conversation. I'm going to be in the networking lounge, open for any questions. Also later on, feel free to hit me on social media. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that I have. So again, keep the conversation going. Thank you for stopping by in this session today.